Welcome back to Friday Reads, where we help you find your next read. I'm Jill.
And I'm Julie, and we are now in November, which is NaNoWriMo, and that also includes memoir writing. So Jill and I decided we were going to pull some new memoirs, or new to you perhaps memoirs. So Jill, what's your first pick?
So my first one is a bit weird. It's called Knife, Meditations After an Attempted Murder by Salman Rushdie. This was published just this year, April in 2024. On the morning of August 12, 2022, Salman Rushdie was standing on stage at the Chautauqua Institution, preparing to give a lecture on the importance of keeping writers safe from harm, when a man in black clothes, black mask, rushed down the aisle toward him, wielding a knife. His first thought, "So it's you. Here you are."
Oh
What followed was a horrific act of violence that shook the literary world and beyond. Now, for the first time and in unforgettable detail, Rushdie relives the traumatic events of that day and its aftermath, as well as his journey toward physical recovery and the healing that was made possible by the love and support of his wife Eliza, his family, his army of doctors and physical therapists, and his community of readers worldwide. So, if you want to hear about an attempted murder and the aftermath, this is the one for you, Salman Rushdie Knife.
My first pick comes from Viola Davis, and this is Finding Me, and this was published in 2022. In this book, you meet a little girl named Viola who ran from her past until she made a life-changing decision to stop running forever. It's her story from a crumbling apartment in Central Falls, Rhode Island, to the stage in New York City and beyond. It's the path she took to finding her purpose, but also her voice in a world that didn't always see her. As she says, "As I wrote Finding Me, my eyes were open to the truth of how our stories are often not given close examination. We are forced to reinvent them to fit into a crazy, competitive, judgmental world." So I wrote this for anyone running through life untethered, desperate and clawing their way through murky memories, trying to get some form of self-love. For anyone who needs reminding that a life worth living can only be born from radical honesty and the courage to shed facades and be you. Finding Me is a deep reflection, a promise, and a love letter of sorts to self. It's a hope that Viola's story will inspire you to light up your own life with creative expression and rediscover who you were before the world put a label on you. So, young Viola to Viola.
That's a good title for a memoir.
Yep, Finding Me. I was thinking about that the other day. If I ever wrote a memoir, what would I call it?
That one's taken. This is a weird title for a one. And then what else? By Daniel Handler. I don't understand it, but maybe if you read it, you will. Or if you know what this is about. A bold, candid, vulnerable, and entertaining memoir of the literary life of Daniel Handler, who you probably never heard of. Who is Daniel Handler? The writer otherwise known as Lemony Snicket.
Oh, yeah.
Part memoir, part inspiration for aspiring writers, and then what else traces Daniel Handler's sometimes challenging and often amusing path towards one of the most spectacularly successful writing careers of the 21st century. Declaring his love of strange literature, Baudelaire's The Flowers of Evil in particular, Handler reflects on the life experience, some of them deeply personal and revealed for the first time, and the cultural influences that shaped his writing, both under his own name and under the pseudonym Lemony Snicket. So, and then what else? If you want to see what made Lemony Snicket write those books, that I read all of them.
That is a good title. And mine, I think I've used this book before, actually. This is Crying in Hmart by Michelle Zahner. This was published in 2021. In this exquisite story of family, food, grief, and endurance, the author proves herself far more than a dazzling singer, songwriter, and guitarist. With humor and heart, she tells of growing up the only Asian American kid at her school in Eugene, Oregon, of struggling with her mother's particular high expectations of her, of a painful adolescence, of treasured months spent in her grandmother's tiny apartment in Seoul, where she and her mother would bond late at night over heaping plates of food. As she grew up, moving to the East Coast for college, finding work in the restaurant industry, performing gigs with her fledgling band, an indie rock band called Japanese Breakfast, and meeting the man who would become her husband, her Koreanness began to feel ever more distant, even as she found the life she wanted to live. It was her mother's diagnosis of terminal pancreatic cancer when Michelle was 25 that forced a reckoning with her identity and brought her to reclaim the gifts of taste, language, and history her mother had given her. Crying in Hmart is a book to cherish, share, and reread. So
I always see that on like the top 10 memoirs
that
of all
was on
time,
a lot of the
so.
lists that I looked at. So I'm like, well, I'm going to pull this one again.
It was worth it. So this next one, this is also new. It was published at the end of last year, September 2023. This is Maria Bramford, Sure I'll Join Your Cult, a memoir of mental illness and the quest to belong anywhere. Maria Bramford is a comedian's comedian, an outsider among outsiders, and has forever fought to find a place to belong. From struggling with an eating disorder as a child of the 80s to navigating a career in the arts and medical debt and psychiatric institutionalization. So, institutionalized. She has tried just about every method possible to not only be part of the world, but to want to be part of it. In Bamford's signature voice, Sure I'll Join Your Cult, brings us on a quest to participate in something. With sincerity and transparency, she recounts every anonymous fellowship she has joined, including but not limited to Debtors Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, and Overeaters Anonymous, every hypomanic episode, from worrying about selling out under capitalism to enforcing union rules on her Netflix TV show set to protect her health, and every easy 1 to 3 step recipe for fudge in between. Singular and inimitable, Bamford's memoir explores what it means to keep going and to be a member of society or any group she's invited to, despite not being very good at it. In turn, she hopes to transform isolating experience into comedy that will make you feel less alone without turning to a cult following. So, Sure, I'll join your cult. Well, just trying to fit in.
I am not familiar with her.
I neither. She sounds funny, though.
Yeah. My third pick is Sociopath, a memoir by Patrick Gagney, and this was published earlier this year. This author realized she made others uncomfortable before she started kindergarten. Something about her caused people to react in a way she didn't understand. She suspected it was because she didn't feel things the way other kids did. Emotions like fear, guilt, and empathy eluded her. For the most part, she felt nothing, and she didn't like the way that nothing felt. She did her best to pretend she was like everyone else, but the constant pressure to conform to a society she knew rejected anyone like her was unbearable. So she stole. She lied. She was occasionally violent. She became an expert lockpicker and home invader, all with the goal of replacing the nothingness with something. In college, she finally confirmed what she'd long suspected. She was a sociopath. But even though it was the first personality disorder identified well over 200 years ago, it had been neglected by mental health professionals for decades. She was told there was no treatment, no hope for a normal life. She found herself haunted by sociopaths in pop culture, madmen, evil villains who are considered monsters. Her future looked grim. But when she reconnects with an old flame, she gets a glimpse of a future beyond her diagnosis. If she's capable of love, it must mean that she isn't a monster. With the help of her sweetheart and some curious characters she meets along the way, she embarks on a mission to prove that the millions of Americans who share her diagnosis aren't all monsters either. It's the inspiring story of her journey to change her fate and how she managed to build a life full of both hope and love.
That one sounds good.
That one intrigued me.
Like, what do you do if you know you're a sociopath? And I'm
I
like,
know.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. So there's a lot of memoirs that are coming out in graphic novels. So I picked one for this because, I don't know, I love graphic novels and what they're doing. So this is It Won't Always Be Like This by Malaka Garib. This was published in 2022. It's hard enough to figure out boys' beauty and being cool when you're young, but even harder when you're in a country where you don't understand the language, culture, or religion. 9-year-old Malaka Garib arrives in Egypt for her annual summer vacation abroad and assumes it'll be just like every other vacation she spent at her dad's place in Cairo. But her father shares news that changes everything. He is remarried. Over the next 15 years, as she visits her father's growing family summer after summer, Malaka must reevaluate her place in his life. All that on top of maintaining her coolness. Malaka doesn't feel like she fits in when she visits her dad. She sticks out in Egypt and doesn't look anything like her fair-haired siblings. She'd but she adapts. She learns that Nirvana isn't as cool as Nancy Adram. And there's nothing better than Fanta and melon mint hookah. That the desert is most beautiful at dawn, and that her new stepmother, Hala, isn't so different from Malaka herself. It Won't Always Be Like This is a touching time capsule of Garib's childhood memories, each summer a fleeting moment in time and a power reflection on identity, relationships, values, family, and what happens when it all collides. So it won't always be like this.
My next pick is for fans of Drew Barrymore. You know, she comes from a family of kind of acting royalty, and she had an unconventional upbringing, so she wrote a book called Wildflower, and this was published back in 2015, and she said, "We all have stories to tell, and these are mine." It's a portrait of her life and stories as she looks back on the adventures, challenges, and incredible experiences of her earlier years. It includes tales of living on her own as early as 14 and how laundry may have saved her life, getting stuck in a gas station overhang on a cross-country road trip, saying goodbye to her father in a way only he could have understood, and many more adventures and lessons that have led her to the successful, happy, and healthy place she is today. I know she's single with a couple daughters, and she's got a TV talk show.
Yeah, she does, and it's quite popular.
Yeah, she's made movies, and now she's got a TV talk show. So if you're interested in Drew Barrymore's upbringing, check out Wildflower.
So my last one, I didn't know if I was going to share this one, but I'm going to because I read it, and it's something different. Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing, Matthew Perry. And if you are going to read this, I would recommend the audio version because he reads it, and it's really kind of something,
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, it was really good.
Hi, my name is Matthew. Although you may know me by another name, my friends call me Maddie, and I should be dead. This is a line from this, so it's very creepy. So begins the riveting story of acclaimed actor Matthew Perry, taking us along on his journey from childhood ambition to fame to addiction and recovery in the aftermath of a life-threatening health scare. Before the frequent hospital visits and stints in rehab, there was a 5-year-old Matthew who traveled from Montreal to Los Angeles, shuffling between his separated parents, 14-year-old Matthew, who was nationally ranked tennis star in Canada, 24-year-old Matthew, who nabbed a coveted role as a lead cast member on a talked-about pilot and then called Friends Like Us, and so much more. In an extraordinary story that only he could tell, and in a heartfelt, hilarious and warmly familiar way only he could tell you, Matthew Perry lays bare the fractured family that raised him and also left him to his own devices, the desire for recognition that drove him to fame, and the void inside him that would not be filled even by his greatest dreams coming true. But he also details the peace he's found in sobriety and how he feels about the ubiquity of friends, sharing stories about his castmates and other stars he met along the way. Frank, self-aware, and with his trademark humor, Perry vividly depicts his lifelong battle with addiction and what fueled it despite seemingly having it all. So, Matthew Perry, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing.
Yeah, I listened to that. That was really good. My last pick is Men We Reaped by Jasmine Ward. This was published in 2013, but in 5 years, Jasmine Ward lost 5 men in her life to drugs, accidents, suicide, and the bad luck that can follow people who live in poverty, particularly black men. Dealing with these losses one after another made her ask the question, why? And as she begins to write about the experience of living through all the dying, she realized the truth, and it took her breath away. Her brother and her friends all died because of who they were and where they were from, because they lived with a history of racism and economic struggle that fostered drug addiction and the dissolution of family and relationships. She says the answer was so obvious she felt stupid for not seeing it. But it nagged at her until she knew she had to write about her community, to write their stories and her own. Jasmine grew up in poverty in rural Mississippi. She writes powerfully about the pressures this brings on the men who can do no right and the women who stand in for family in a society where the men are often absent. She bravely tells her story, revisiting the agonizing losses of her only brother and her friends. As a sole member of her family to leave home and pursue higher education, she writes about this parallel American universe with the objectivity distance provides and the intimacy of utter familiarity. So she's a popular author here, so kind of intrigued by her book too, Men We Reaped. It's a quote from Harriet Tubman. And then we heard the rain falling, and that was the drops of blood falling. And when we came to get the crops, it was dead men that we reaped.
Oh.
So that's where that comes from.
Wow. Well, I hope if you're in the mood for a memoir, we gave you some good ideas of some different memoirs that you can try.
Thank you for watching our videos. Find us on our Facebook page, Kimberly Public Library's YouTube and website. And until next time, thanks for watching. Bye.